Welcome to WHACHACHA'S Wargaming Journey. My name is Sweetness WHACHACHA, and this is the first episode. We're going to see how it goes. So, just a little background about me. I've been an avid board gamer for about 15 years, pretty heavily into the hobby. It's been my major hobby outside of watching movies, and I love everything. I love heavy Euro games. I love very thematic, Ameritrash, as they called it, or they don't really call it that anymore, but and everything in between. I like to grow wine. I like to kill monsters. I like to do things in history, or I love all that kind of stuff. So I've been very into a whole lot of stuff. I like party games, but that's a good little segue because I don't do a lot of it. I think, I kind of have been transplanted into what I think is the middle of nowhere for many years now. I met my lovely wife, and so I live out about 15 hours, 900 miles from where I did once live. And so most of my gaming at the time of this writing would be solo and occasionally playing some games with her. So before that, I played Magic the Gathering and for a number of years, and, Axis and Allies and things like that when I was in high school, Dungeons and Dragons around that time, although that's a wonderfully amazing game, but not something that I can find myself really getting into these days, unfortunately, because it is very, very cool. For about 5 years there, I was really into a living card game called Lord of the Rings, the card game. It's a game you could play solo or with friends cooperatively. I would play it solo. And it's what they call a lifestyle game. And that's kind of one of the things that sort of started this little stew of ideas that has led me to this kind of this project. And so it's kind of a cool thing because you get to play the game, but when you're not playing the game, you can kind of think about different strategies. It's sort of you make a deck and then you play the game. And I kind of spent a lot of time thinking like, what if I did this and this and this? And oh, that'd be a good combo. And when I get home, maybe I'll put that together and give it a try. And so there's a lot of times that you can spend doing what's called meta strategy, right? Is to be playing the game when you're not playing the game or kind of getting ready to play the game. And, because of that license, I could listen to the books, and that would enhance my enjoyment of both the books and of playing the game, which is fun. And then, of course, listening to some podcasts and things based on that game and stuff. And it kind of was a whole hobby in and of itself. I kind of took a break from major board gaming because this is a good way that I could just kind of play when I wanted to play. That game has ended, but I like that whole idea. I also quite like the idea of playing a game, having sort of a thematic tie, as I kind of mentioned there. Being able to play a game, such as I played a game with my friend Jesse in town here, of Rear Window, which is based on the Alfred Hitchcock movie. And I love the idea of playing that kind of a game and then watching the movie and having sort of a dinner and, tied up in that thematic dinner, if you could. And so I really like doing that, having these little mini micro sort of events just to enhance the enjoyment and to sort of make an evening of it. So all these things sort of swirling around, and they sort of set the stage for, my interest in maybe doing something like that. So the wargaming part of it kind of came in because I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts, which is Dan Carlin. He does something called Hardcore History. If you haven't listened to it, it's amazing. It's conversational in tone, which is what I kind of like. And he'll explain, these interesting points of history. And he did like a 6-parter on the Pacific Theater, and I thought, oh, that's very interesting. And I remembered I had this old, a couple of versions of Axis and Allies Europe and Axis and Allies Pacific, so I busted out the Pacific game, and I really spent about 2 hours setting the thing up and trying to relearn the rules, etc. I mean, it'd been 20 years since I've touched this thing, really. I don't know how I still hung on to it after all the, winding paths that I've taken. But, that really didn't lend itself to a solo play and to really practicality in terms of setting up and stuff. It's not like modern board games. It doesn't have that ease of play. But the idea of I'd love to, get into this history and sort of, see where, play a part of it, I guess, or play kind of take the reins of history into my own hands to both understand the conflict better in some way, and I don't know, to relate to it better. I don't know. There's a whole kind of myriad of reasons why people do that. So, and I was fit in there somewhere. So that didn't quite work out. Another thing that sort of happened, which is sort of another ingredient into this stew, was I figured out how to use my airbrush, or more importantly, I got a new airbrush. As an aside, if you're going to paint stuff as a hobbyist, like for miniatures and things, get a gravity-fed airbrush, not a bottom-fed airbrush, which is what solved my whole problem. It's been sitting on my shelf for years, and now I thought to myself, boy, I would love to paint some tanks, because vehicles and things, now the airbrush is not a replacement for brush painting and stuff. It's just another tool in a toolbox of, that you have to be creative. And the airbrush, though, does do a very good job of not having brush strokes, which is what you really need when you're doing vehicles like helicopters or ships or tanks and things like that. And so I'd not been able to really paint that stuff for a very long time, and I thought, I'd love to do that. And that's kind of where that little seed started and connected these other things. And I thought, I'd really like to, to do some wargaming. And a lot of people might think like that's crazy to wargame by yourself, to like solo a game just alone, play both sides. I don't know, I always remember seeing in the movies and stuff, people would always have the chessboard set up and they'd be like, yes, I'll move a piece here, and they're playing against themselves. And I've enjoyed playing a lot of solo games like that before, as long as there's open information on both sides. And so this is a way for me to enjoy it. Now, the rest of the idea came, I thought, well, I do like to hobby. I like to paint miniatures and things. I do that for board games or sort of maybe squad-based skirmish type, miniatures games. And so I've got some background there, and I do enjoy that activity. But this, I thought, was a way to make a bit more out of it. So at one point, I felt like people would play something like Warhammer, which is a very popular war game, not historically based, of course. It's a science fiction fantasy type game. And, I always was like, it's crazy you spend so long like building models and painting them and adapting them and learning this stuff, and you spend like very small amount of time actually playing the game. And I always was like, I just want to play again and 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 play again, like a child, like again, I just love to play stuff. Now, as I'm getting older, things change, your perspective changes, you get wiser, hopefully I've gotten wiser. And I thought it's kind of a cool thing. I mean, because it's a little more zen, right? I mean, and here in the West, we think of, well, I'm going to go away for the weekend and I'm going to take this retreat and I'm going to learn how to, carve trunks out of a chainsaw or whatever. We have this idea of mastery of things, right? Like I'm going to go learn this and I'm going to master this. I'm going to become a master gardener. Done. Check it off the list. And Eastern philosophy is very different. It's more about, you're always learning things. You're always doing things. And part of like painting miniatures, I remember I had this opportunity where I was like, I'm going to paint these miniatures, and I'm like, I just want to play with them. I want them in the game painted. And it's a terrible idea. You have to enjoy that process. And so I thought, this is kind of where I've shifted. I don't need to be playing this thing constantly, but I can enjoy the journey, right? And so I want to read up on different conflicts and things, or reread, I should say, and then paint the armies and stuff, and paint them historically accurate, look into that kind of thing, and then, maybe set up scenarios or whatever, and sort of relive those conflicts. And then it's a whole encompassing hobby. So I thought that'd be a really kind of a nice little thing for me to do. And I don't need to finish all my army off and take it to a tournament or something. It's just like, no, this is a road that goes off into the distance, and I'm just going to enjoy where it takes me. So that's kind of the... But what conflict do I settle on? I have my parameters. I need there to be a lot of podcasts, books, movies, literature, I need all that stuff. I need there to be enough of that. I also need to have the vehicles to paint, different kinds of vehicles that I want to airbrush and paint and stuff. And of course the soldiers, to be able to paint them and assemble them, and to have enough choice or availability of those things. And so I need to make sure that I'm filling my gaming bucket, my hobby bucket, and also the sort of meta learning, that sort of thing, that sort of area. So a couple of conflicts jump out at me immediately. Of course, these have to be historical conflicts, of course. And the first one is World War I. It's always been very, very interesting to me. These images of the trenches, the gas, the fact that it's this amazingly large modern conflict that really, changed people or changed the way that society viewed warfare. And it's very fascinating to me. Unfortunately, I don't think there is as much information. I mean, there's a lot for sure, but not as much as maybe some other conflicts. And like they did have tanks and things, but they're definitely scaled back. And I don't know how much availability you can find stuff like that. And maybe they might not be as much fun to paint. And, there's no choppers or planes or anything like that. So let's put that one to the side for a moment. Napoleonics, that's another one that comes to mind pretty quickly. Again, you're missing the vehicles, and I don't know a lot about the Napoleonic Wars. I actually really want to read a good book. If anybody comments below, I'd love to know something good to read, because that's an area that I'd really like to learn more at, which makes it a good candidate for this, because that would be a great little journey, right? But almost predictably, I have settled on World War II. Now, there's a preponderance of this. I mean, there's unending amounts of books, movies, podcasts, whatever, all that. I mean, there's a ton of information. There's also tons of different vehicles. In terms of modeling and finding gaming and stuff, there's tons and tons of it. So there's a lot of choices there. So that makes a natural fit. So that seems like a good way to go. I also remember, I've had a lifelong interest in this. I remember when I was a kid, my father he's passed away now, but he was very, very involved in reading history and maps and things. And he was very, very interested in World War II, among other things. And when we were kids, we would go to air shows and, we'd see the B-17s. We would go to, aircraft carriers, submarines. We went to I have a very fond memory when I was a child of going to the USS Ling, which was located in New Jersey from New York. And there was a couple of old timers. They used to work on the submarine, and they were there, and they just gave us this. There was my father, my twin, and I, and we just went through the sub, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we used to store potatoes in this thing, and when we ate enough of them, that was another bathroom that was available to us." And I mean, as a kid, that was fascinating. I mean, now it would be probably get a lot more out of it, but at the time, it was very, very interesting to me. And I would read books on B-17s and books on subs and all that kind of stuff. And I was very interested in that. And of course, my father would take us to these air shows and things, and you'd see the old planes, the old Mustangs flying around and stuff like that, which was pretty cool. I mean, I'm sure my brother and I probably would have liked other things maybe more, but looking back, I'm glad we had those experiences. We would stop. My father had a Thursday during the summer. We would do this thing a couple summers in a row where he would take us out on a Thursday, and we would go on something fairly close, a few hours away, and we would stop at a comic shop for my brother and I, which is kind of funny since here we are, almost 30 years later, and I'm still reading comic books and looking into World War II stuff. I guess not a whole lot changes in some ways, which is kind of interesting. My dad also, before he passed away, I remember he was obsessed with this book called Army at Dawn, which is about America's entry point into World War II. And it's very strange to me to think about, because he was obsessed with this book. At the time, I used to manage a bookstore, and I remember he would call me all the time and be like, "Hey," because it was part of a planned trilogy, and he'd say, "Hey, is that any information on the second or third books coming out or whatever?" And I would be like, "Dad, you have the internet. We don't have the internet here in the store. We're not allowed to have the internet. So you have way more information than I do." But he was excited about it. And it's kind of a strange thing. He passed away without ever seeing, reading those books. They came out after his death. And I think about that and I'm like, that's so crazy. I can imagine you're in the middle of a book series or fiction, like a trilogy, or you're watching the new Star Wars movies, or you're waiting for Avengers Endgame or something like that, and you're like, "Oh, I can't wait for those next couple of movies," and you die before then. I don't know, there might be some lesson in there, something about seizing the day and you're living your life or whatever, but I don't know, I think about that sort of thing sometimes. I did read that book, and I started the second in the series, and I think I'm going to revisit some of that with read some of that stuff, because it's very good. I have a hard time retaining those facts and things. Like I see some of these war gamers and stuff, and people talk, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, this tank has this armor," that they remember all these things. And as I get older, I find my memory is not so good, and I don't retain that stuff as well. But I do find it fascinating when I'm reading it. So I'm looking forward to sort of revisiting some of that stuff. But anyway, that's kind of where I'm at. So this first episode, I've solved the question of what's the conflict I'm going to concentrate on, and that's World War II. But the next step is going to be, what's the game going to be for me to play and model and diorama while I'm learning more about that conflict. So that's going to be in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Comment below if you like. I'm terrible at social media, so sorry about that.